Welcome to My Therapist Says, an interactive experience enriching your most important relationships. During today's event, I'll be your host and moderator as we present the Ransomed Journey, Pursuing Freedom from Addiction. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, the Bible gives us the antidote to addiction. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Relationship with God through Jesus Christ provides the ultimate experience in life, free of addiction. Anything or any person in whom we worship other than God may well become an addiction. For example, food, work, success, sex, special relationships, and more can become addictive. The question before us today is, how do we get free from addiction? This evening's guest is Dr. Jennifer Conzen, a licensed marriage and family therapist and the director of the Center for Sexuality. Dr. Conzen received her doctorate from Alliant International University and is a chemical dependency counselor, specializing in addictions. As one of my colleagues at the Center for Enriching Relationships, I'm proud to introduce Dr. Conzen, an outstanding mental health clinician who will help us with how to pursue freedom from addiction. Today's event takes place before a live audience and live streaming while offering practical biblical solutions. It's like having your own Christian doctor within the comforts of your living room. I hope you will sit back, relax, and take in these life-changing insights. Please join me as we now connect with a live audience and My Therapist Says. Welcome to My Therapist Says, and Dr. Jennifer Conzen is with us this evening. Once again, I think about Dr. Conzen. She's a colleague, a friend, and actually I've been under her tutelage. She's also a certified sex therapist. I'm taking some training along with other colleagues with Dr. Jennifer Conzen. She's also a specialist in the area this evening that we're working on, and that is violence, domestic violence, addictions, the issues that may overtake us. And so she has a lot of training and background. She received her doctorate at Alliant International University, that is. She also has a book that will be coming out here, I believe, in June.
July?
It's July. I'm a month off, but that's coming up, and you'll want to read that as that comes out. She's also the director and owner of the Center for Sexuality that actually is a colleague of the Center for Enriching Relationships, of which she and I work together. So we're so privileged to have you this evening, and just welcome to you, Dr. Conzen. And we know that you're going to have so much to share. I must say that she has a beautiful family, too. If you have a chance to talk with her about her family and her wonderful husband, they have a marvelous relationship. And we're just so pleased to have you here this evening once again with My Therapist Says. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Conzen?
Let me just jump in here. Okay. I am glad to be here. I get to talk to you about an area that I work a lot with. I am a certified chemical dependency counselor. So a number of the individuals that come to see me are for addictions. Because I'm also a certified sex therapist, people do come for sexual addiction as well. So I work with kind of all of the spectrum. Individuals that come for food addictions, shopping addictions, you name it. So we're going to kind of cover all of that tonight very quickly. So basically, so the title of it is The Ransomed Journey. Where with addictions, there are many journeys, and you see here in Psalm 107, some sat in darkness and in the deepest gloom, prisoners suffering in iron chains, for they had rebelled against the words of God and despised the counsel of the Most High. So he subjected them to bitter labor. They stumbled, and there was no one to help. So this really describes the journey of use. You know, when people are under compulsive uses, they're using some substance or behavior compulsively. This is such a perfect example of the chains that can bind people. Then you see the ransom. Sorry, go ahead and go back. You see the ransom there on the bottom. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. So that's God saying, I can ransom you from those chains. I can release you from the power of those chains. And then you get the full picture in the rest of 107. He says, he brought them out of darkness and the deepest gloom and broke away their chains. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love, for his wonderful deeds for men, for that he breaks down gates of bronze and cuts through bars of iron. That's the ransomed journey, where our ransomer, the Lord, comes and takes us on a new journey to break the chains. And look at his heart here. So this is a compilation of 4 different scriptures. The words, though, are all straight from those 4 scriptures. This is God's heart to us about that journey. He says, I understand well your experience. I hear the cry of the needy, the afflicted, and the broken. Come to me. I am your refuge. I am safe. I will remake what is broken. I will give you reason to trust and then to love. I will remake your joy. So that's what an amazing promise from God, that if we go on this journey with him, this is his promise. He can remake our brokenness. So the reality is, sometimes in that journey, you've got to figure out what exactly is the problem. There can be all kinds of different problems with addictions. You want to make sure you're identifying the correct one. The reality is, for many people, it's hard to identify their use. They're either in denial of it, I don't really have a problem, or they're not actually sure what the underlying issues are. It is hard for people to own this piece. And then usually underneath addiction is all of the stuff like depression, anxiety, and all kinds of other issues that are underneath addictive processes. So it's important to figure out what came first. This is a typical piece in therapy is, did depression happen first and then the person started drinking, or did the drinking cause the depression? Is it the chicken or the egg? Because if it's both, then you actually need to treat both. As a therapist, that's actually what I do, is I treat both. And then if you are a family member or a friend of somebody dealing with different levels of addiction, you might have questions as well. What is the problem? And am I the person that should jump in there? How much should I get involved in helping? And to what point should I say, okay, I've done what I can and I should not continue helping? At what point should I say stop? So that's important, is identifying the problem. The reality is, addiction covers a lot of different areas. As far as actual physical substances, the most addictive substances are the legal ones. Just recently, the DSM-5 in the last couple of years came out with nicotine and caffeine are in the DSM-5 as addictive substances that you can get covered by your insurance to have your chains broken. Alcohol being the other. So the 3 most addictive are the legal ones. So this is, okay, so what do the scriptures say about that top one, which is alcohol? Wow, these are such great scriptures. Solomon says, wine is a mocker, beer is a brawler, whoever's led astray by them is not wise. Don't join with those who drink too much wine, for the drunkards become poor and drowsiness clothes them in rags. Who has woe, sorrow, strife, needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine. It goes down smoothly, but in the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. I mean, I have to say, when I first read that scripture, I had already been a therapist for a while, and I'd read that before, but when I read it in the context of addiction, I was like, it just says it. It goes down smooth. People get involved in addictions because it feels good. I mean, you're not going to pursue it if there's not not some pleasure involved. So it goes down smooth, but boy, it bites. And it poisons, right? So what are addictions? Like I said, the 3 most common ones are the 3 that I mentioned. And then that's drug and alcohol addiction. And then you've got behavioral addictions, gambling, shopping, food addictions, sex addiction. So I actually work with all of those. We're going to hit some of them. All of them have something in common. They all get involved in what you call the dopamine reward system. So if you haven't heard of that, basically, here's the picture. I eat something, woo, that was nice. The brain lays down the memory that something was nice, and then it wants to do it again. Well, we do that, right? We eat chocolate and we go, oh, that tasted so good. And in that limbic system, very small part of your brain, it says, that's so good, let's do it again. So it can do it with chocolate cake, and it can do it with gambling, it can do it with alcohol, it can do it with sexual behaviors, it can do it with anything where the system starts to go, I need more of that to have that reward system. And that's kind of what we understand at this point. Honestly, brain science is still in its early stages. But this is what we understand at this point, is that dopamine gets involved and says, woo, that was great, now I want to do it again. So let's look at some of them. Let's look at alcohol first. This is this is straight out of the most recent research. 2012 and 13 are the most recent research on drugs and alcohol. Look at that. The highest amount of use, you want to really pay attention to the gray. The highest amount of use is in the 20s, all right? So that's the college years and early and middle 20s. But notice it's still up there. Binge drinking is the gray. Binge, which means you're still having heavy use. Heavy is the blue, so this would be addiction. But you're talking this percentage is still drinking and having binges, drinking binges. So alcohol is the single greatest abuse substance that we have out there. Look at it there. There's alcohol. This is 2013. Alcohol's at the top. What's the next one? It's marijuana. I can barely read my own slide, huh? This is who goes to treatment for stuff. What's the greatest treatment? Alcohol. So the majority of people that go for addiction treatment go for alcohol. And then you see all the drugs after that. All right. Then we're going to talk about, so what are they? So there's the legal ones that we just looked at a few minutes ago. These are the illegal ones. That's illicit drugs, illegal drugs. That's the hallucinogens, cocaine, amphetamines, marijuana, opiates, and then the illegal use of pharmaceuticals. So let's look at some stuff on those. You've got the non-medical use, which means somebody that shouldn't even have the prescription is using it. So this is on prescription drugs specifically. And then you've got somebody who actually does legally have the prescription and they're using it not as prescribed. The two greatest ones for those are oxycodone. Another name for that is OxyContin. And this is what's amazing. So this is pain relievers. They are half of the 4 million episodes of narcotic analgesic abuse. It's a narcotic, it's an analgesic. Half of them are oxycodone. San Diego is one of the highest uses of oxycodone, OxyContin, for illegal purposes. The corridor from Torrey Pines to Poway, we actually have our own OxyContin task force here in the police force. The second one is benzodiazepines, which is the Xanax, Klonopin, and Ativan. So those are the greatest drugs of abuse, prescription drugs of abuse. Then we've got behavioral addiction. So notice I've skipped over meth, cocaine. Okay, all of those big issues. Here's the behavioral addictions. You've got pornography, sexual addiction, basically, all falls under that. Food addictions, gambling, which is the only one that made it into the DSM, and then you've got shopping. So let's talk about those. I'm going to use gambling addiction as the example, okay? This is the only one, like I said, in the DSM, and this is what it says about it. You have increasing amounts of money. You have to use more and more money to get that high during the gambling. You feel restless when you try to cut down or slow down or stop. You try to stop multiple different times, but you're unsuccessful. Then you're preoccupied with thinking about it. When's the next time I'm going to go? You know, you're planning where's the next time, where. You're thinking about ways to get the money. Gambling, gambling to deal with distress. In other words, when you're sad, when you're angry, you go gamble. If you lose money for the gambling, then you're going to go gambling again so that you can win it all back. That's the chasing one's losses. Then you lie and try to conceal all of it. You jeopardize relationships, jobs, money to gamble. and you rely on others to get your money. So these are the actual definitions for gambling disorder. There is a disorder. Well, actually, they apply to all of them. How would it look like if you're just a normal, everyday person? Like maybe you're asking yourself, oh, shoot, maybe that's me. I mean, I came here for my family member, but maybe it's me. Well, then you ask yourself these. Do you feel the need to be secretive about, now I say gambling here, but you can put any word here, about your alcohol, about your shopping? Do you feel the need to be secretive? Do you have trouble controlling that behavior or that use, that food? Are you having trouble controlling it? Can you walk away? And then that last part, is anybody you know about worried about it? Do you have any family members that are, I'm worried about how much you're taking in that substance or going gambling or going shopping and so on? You know, so one of the examples is, like, we're here talking about addictions. Food can be an addictive substance. I love the little sign here, give me chocolate and nobody gets hurt. I'm not going to go into the details of it here, but it's very similar. In the bottom there, it says similarities to all the other behavioral addictions: hiding, lying, ritualized behavior, using despite the consequences, planning, time focus. The reality is we can all kind of look at our behaviors and kind of go, I mean, the last time you lost your phone, how did you react? Right? Did you panic? They actually did this little survey. 75% of people said they panicked. Right? Another 15% said that they were really sad and distressed. Another 5% said they were relieved. You know, we all can get addicted to something. Really what you're looking at is, does it cause, you know, some of these more problems with functioning and relationships and so on. I get asked a lot about, what about sexual addiction? It looks a lot the same as all of these behavioral addictions. Excessive time consuming, doing it, using it in response to negative mood states, unsuccessfully trying to cut it off, disregarding risks to health and relationships and job. Behavior might include, and here's a list: cyber sex, telephone sex, adult entertainment, masturbation, pornography. So honestly, all of these have a lot in common. And a lot of it is mood, you know, dealing with depression, anxiety by using this substance or this behavior. So the question is, when somebody comes in for treatment, what's involved in it? A lot of it is starting to look at that question of, is this actually a disease? Is this a brain disorder? That's a big question out in the field. It still is. We have all kinds of people saying it's genetic and attached to a gene. We don't know yet. We haven't found it yet. The general belief is that it's a general transmission, starting with a specific gene, but then it's a predisposing and you get triggered. Something happens and it triggers you into use. There's cultural factors that hugely play into it. There's learned behaviors. There's modeling that you had as a child, that you learned to cope early on with emotion issues by this addictive use. And emotion regulation. There might be trauma in your background. So when people come in for addictive care, it usually covers all of these different facets. So in that road of care, what's on it? You're going to deal with the generational patterns that happen in families. Sometimes it's just habitual use, which is self-control, learning how to deal with that. Sometimes it's long-term relational issues. Also helping people with openness. Usually there's a lack of openness, because there's lots of hurts and doubts and fears and anger and disappointments that happen around issues of use. And a lot of times what people are missing is purpose and meaning, motivation. So in treatment, this is what's on the road. This is the ransomed journey. This is the road that is involved in recovery. When I work with entire families, which I do, so I'll get whole families in my office. Sometimes I'll get just a couple in my office. But with families, you have to work on some specific things, and those are the secrets within those families that occur, rituals that have been dominated by substance abuse, major disruption in family relationships, the unhealthy modeling, the chaos and the disengagement that occurs around addiction. And then, of course, boundaries in the relationships are either super rigid, lots of rules in the family, or they're super disengaged and there's no rules. And then you've got lots of things that have come up during the time of use. Often you'll see neglect, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. So when I'm working with families, all of these issues are important to cover. One thing that's important is that during the process of therapy for families, things often get worse before they get better. And this is huge because the process of recovery is sometimes just as traumatic as the time of use, because all the stuff that got buried by the addiction now comes up. So there's sometimes ongoing violence that happened, and sometimes it still occurs during the times of recovery. Children have, been neglected, so all of a sudden the parent comes in and wants to be a parent, and there's all kinds of conflict around that. This is if the parent is the one using. And then all those undealt feelings that went for years are finally coming up, and there's lots of bitterness, resentment, anger. So during recovery, sometimes it can be actually worse. Then you've got the pieces of, you've got this extended family that has all kinds of thoughts, and they've cut people off, and there's no support. You have issues with that. There's financial problems. Sometimes people have lost their cars, their jobs. There's issues with that. You got meal times and holidays and all those rituals that have been destroyed by the use. So when you're dealing with families, you're dealing with really a whole restructuring of the family during the process of therapy. Specifically, though, there's some specific challenges to couples. So you can go to the next slide here. I'm going to actually skip these next two. For those of you with them, these are the do's and don'ts. We're going to skip them. Okay, so here, the specific challenges to couples are that often there's one that works really, really hard trying to fix everything and one that's uninvolved. So dealing with that dynamic is huge with couples. Also, often you'll have that the times that they talked the most was in the midst of the use. So it's what you call traumatic bonding, especially if both of them have a background in addiction. Couples who enjoyed good communication and good sex only under the influence of the substance. The only time that they shared really openly, you'll see that with people, they get super angry when they're under the influence of a substance, and they'll express their anger, but they don't express it when they're sober. So for a lot of people, the only time they finally express things is in the midst of use. And then often what happens is when people are in the midst of recovery, you'd think, oh, now everything's going to get better. Actually, the greatest amount of divorces happen in the midst of recovery because the recovery process brings up all the problems, and it's very challenging to work with. So it's very specific challenges there. Sexual difficulties come up, especially if it's substance uses or sexual addictions, because all the problems that were happening sexually, sometimes drugs are used to cover up the sexual problems. So then up they all come with sexual interest, impotence, ejaculation dysfunction, and all of those. Most people enter as couples into recovery, and they have to just do individual work for a couple of years before they can start working on the marriage. And sometimes the spouse is like, I've had enough. I'm not ready. I'm not willing to wait. So, and then, of course, if somebody's going to individual care, that's a lot to balance. They've got this family that's like, you haven't been here for 10 years, and now you have to go to recovery meetings all the time. So balancing the recovery to the family and to the individual is very challenging. So we're going to skip this next one, but it's for your information. What would you do if you came to couples therapy? The last slide is, how do you, as a church family and individuals, how do you respond to somebody in the midst of use? Number one, you have to speak the truth in love, Ephesians 4:15. And what's important about that is redefining love. When you look at Hebrews 12, it says the Lord disciplines those he loves. He punishes everyone he accepts as a son, as a father disciplines us for a little while. As they thought best, God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. So sometimes people have to relearn what real, genuine love is, and that it may be that kind of tough love where you have to put up really serious boundaries around addiction. Also, your response to people in use as a church and as individuals is to allow consequences to happen. When you look at the rich young ruler, the prodigal son, he goes out and ends up with the pigs. And it says when he began to be in need, no one gave him anything. Sometimes there has to be a point where you say, no, I can't help you with that. I can't give you that. I can't do that for you. Because the other piece is helping people to come to repentance. You see John the Baptist where all the Pharisees are coming saying, we want to get baptized. And he's like, no, you know what? you need to produce fruit in keeping with repentance. So there is important pieces of what your response can be is letting consequences be what they are, expecting repentance, and then, yes, the truth and the grace. See how I've highlighted it here? Truth and grace. Grace and truth. This is the Father's response when the Son does return. While he was still a long way off, his Father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran and threw his arms around him and kissed him. You can hold to all of these consequences and expect change and repentance, and you can still be loving. Not necessarily just when they repent. You can still hug them and put your arms around them like God would. And yet, that's that balance. God, of course, Jesus having the perfect balance between grace and truth. So that is a very, very quick rundown of both what some of the issues are and what treatment can sometimes look like for those issues. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, what a spectacular presentation, giving us some wonderful ideas about not only the background and understanding of addictions and how we react to things and people and situations, but also ways in which people can enter therapy and begin to work on issues. Well, we have a number of questions. We have about 3 questions so far. If you have a question that you would like responded to, please just raise it in the air. One of our hosts will come by and bring it to me. There's a hand down here. I think we have a couple on this left-hand side here. There's a question here that a person was asking, first of all, and this is a pretty common one, where people are they have pain, they're needing to have some sort of medical treatment to help them to be able to sleep. We know that as therapists that sleep, actually the lack of sleep can almost mask the idea that the person's depressed, when actually if they could get better sleep, their body might be able to kind of self-regulate, go back to more of a homeostatic position and heal itself within. But the question is, what do you do when you need medicine to sleep at night because your back hurts from surgery from about 5 months ago? I want to be free from the pain and sleep, but can't. I know this question really would be more for a physician. We both are licensed mental health psychotherapists. I think it's a great question. I know you've been asked this before, and of course, we have certain training and we can answer certain questions, but it is a very good question that people oftentimes in therapy will ask. What do you do when you need medicine to sleep at night because your back hurts from surgery from 5 months ago? I want to be free from the pain and sleep, but can't.
Right. So one of the great things about what the DSM did in the new diagnoses, not new, but clearing up of the diagnostic labels, is that there's a difference between dependence and addiction. So dependence is when, because your body has to be on certain medications, your body does become dependent on them. Addiction is when you start using those medications in ways that they were not intended. Yes, people have to be on certain medications, and those medications, your body becomes dependent on it, and you only would use a doctor to change how much you take, when you take it, and if you need to lower it. So sleeping medications and pain medications, almost all of them are addictive. So then you've got people who are like, I don't want to be addicted, and they try to go off of those. Bad idea. You may want to, but do it only under a doctor's care. So it's really important to define the difference between dependence and addiction. Your body can be physically dependent on a substance, and that doesn't mean you're an addict. You may need to take that substance. Only this is where if you start using it in ways, because a lot of people start off with back pain and end up using oxycodone and the other pain medications, and they start using it off-label or using it for the emotional management piece. That's when you're no longer using it as the doctor actually intended it. And actually it is one of the largest issues for medical doctors to deal with, is how to figure out if the person sitting before them is using the medication the way they should, or if they're using it for other reasons than just the pain and help for sleep.
Let's talk about that emotional piece then. Say someone, and it's a very common
big
piece,
one.
because actually chronic Yeah, chronic
back
pain.
pain.
We were never meant to be in chronic pain.
Right.
And at least the patients with whom I've worked over the years,
Right.
chronic pain is so disabling,
Yeah.
so debilitating. And there are people who live with this, and they're
Yeah.
trying to find some way to manage it. Talk to us for just a moment, Dr. Conzen, about what does it mean for a person to move in to, say, an emotional...
Using it for emotional regulation.
Yes.
Right. That is a piece of, that's the openness. If you'll notice, one of the biggest pieces is hiding things, or when it becomes a big sign that I'm no longer using it the way I'm supposed to. If people start using that medication because, now obviously when you relieve your pain, you feel better. But if you start using it to manage stress, to manage depression, to manage, or they use more of it because it gives them a euphoria. That's when it becomes, it's no longer about pain, it's about the euphoria, and it's about I'm using it to deal with anxiety and depression, which is not the intention of that medication.
This happens so frequently.
It's one of the biggest reasons why people end up in prescription, where the prescription becomes an actual addiction, and it goes beyond dependence.
Right. Yes. So let's talk about some skills. So there may be those listening live stream, those listening after this is posted, so that people can hear it after the presentation tonight, or those here in the audience. What would be ways for me to be able to discern that I am using it more and it's moving me more toward an addiction than I'm just dependent, and so I'm using it more for an emotional, euphoric relief, if you will, than for its determined purpose?
Right. So one thing is if you're using it in any way other than the label says.
Okay, start there, because you just said that a moment ago.
That's a big one. And then also, people use all kinds of things to deal with stress.
Yeah.
If you're feeling stressed and you think, I need to take my medicine, you can usually tell what the motivation is, where you're no longer just taking it your X number times a day, but you start thinking, I'm feeling stressed, this helps me, I'm going to take it. And if there's any desire to hide those times, so again, that desire to hide, anytime you're using it differently than what's on the label, and then you just have to start noticing, there are times where I've used it because. So that is where you have to turn to, I am not learning other coping mechanisms to deal with the stress, the depression, the anger, things like that. I need to find some other coping mechanisms. I need to go do yoga. I need to get in a support group. I need to have a better relationship in my marriage. I need to go get help with that. That there are other areas that I actually need to strengthen my coping that I've begun using this substance for.
Because there's a tendency to move inward and to feel as though I'm going to control this piece in my life, which gives me some sense of relief in and of itself. That's kind of the emotional part. Can you name any other ways that you've named a number of them, like particular exercise, yoga, there are writing, journaling,
movement being huge,
and then making sure that you're making yourself more open, maybe having a family friend or someone that you could be accountable to even indicate that you're having these feelings. But any other suggested ways to learn how to cope with the pain within the parameters of that certain designated medication?
Well, when people come to see me and they've got any compulsive uses of anything, the first thing I do is you need your individual care. So you might need a therapist or a mentor of some kind. Get into some kind of support group. You need some group support. Move physically. Make sure that you've got, because exercise is very, very, now of course this is challenging when you've got back pain. But exercise, some kind of movement is super important. Obviously nutrition being huge. But really what it comes down to, one of the biggest things I first work with is majorly up your support network. Make sure that you're doing fun stuff as well. Go out and do fun things. Go out and get in a support group. Go have somebody that you're allowing them to hold you accountable for different things. So up all of your support network.
And that is so difficult, though. The tendency is to isolate. It's almost the opposite of that. You're saying assert yourself and find others to support. The tendency is to isolate what are some things that you've suggested to your patients, your clients, when they feel like they want to isolate and they know they need to do what you've just suggested, but they're almost feeling incapable of doing so?
Right, and that's where you're dealing a lot with depression often in that kind of a situation.
Yes.
Number one, they have to start with coming to see me.
Okay.
That's kind of a safe
Dr.
spot.
Jennifer Conson.
Yes. Just having somebody, if they're already seeing me is what I mean.
Oh,
all right,
okay, excuse
so
me.
let's up how often you're coming to see me, or let's make sure it's regular or consistent. But then, yes, actually, someone's like, I just feel like I just want to bury myself, is you have to check where the safety is in their relationships, because often the burying is from the fact that they do have different relationships, but they're not very safe.
Yeah.
So you have to really help people with how to establish relationships where they feel super supported.
Yes.
So that's a big piece in it. And then, honestly, I hold them accountable when they're coming. So, did you call? Did you get with? Did you go out to dinner with? Did you go have some fun with? Did you? How was that? Especially with depression, you have to get out the door and go move, even if it's just walking. So,
and usually, what we'll do when we talk about walking and physical exercise,
huge.
It is huge, isn't it? It's such an important piece that we, as therapists, will typically ask the patient to consult with her or his physician. So we're not just saying, and you didn't say this, but we're not saying you should go out and exercise. Say you have back pain, your physician would say, no, you cannot and shall not do these particular exercises, but the physician might help to be able to exercise. It's kind of God's great gift to us, isn't this?
Yeah, movement is very important.
Yes, thank you. This actually, talking about movement, this next question, it's a segue into this, and that is, when does exercise become an addiction? This is a great, great question, particularly in Southern California. And what is the line between determined athlete and an addict?
Right. So I also specialize in eating disorders. And eating disorders overlap into excessive exercise for some individuals, where they will actually use exercise to monitor their weight in a sometimes unhealthy way. So one of the biggest ways that you can really figure out if you're exercising to excess is what's it attached to. We will often use the word, I just want to be healthy. We'll say, I just want to be healthy. When actually it's not just health. We have a poor body image. And so we monitor, if you find yourself monitoring what you eat and what you weigh, along with how much you work out, that can be an indication of there being a problem with the actual working out. You're using the workout to monitor your body. The other thing about exercising is it's not just for losing weight, it's also for a male body image of gaining musculature. And so it has to do with the exact same process of how addictions play in. If you're consumed with it, if you get super emotional when you can't do it, if you're spending an inordinate amount of time thinking about it. So actually with exercise, it's almost exactly the same as all of the other processes of addictions. Pay attention to the amount of time you're thinking about it, the amount to which it consumes you. If you don't, how anxious you get when you can't do it, those kinds of pieces.
Yeah, that's that last piece. We probably ought to even repeat that. Is as somebody's ruminating or cycling on something, is how, if you're not participating, are you becoming anxious, or what level to which you may be?
If it starts to affect your other relationships, it affects your social life. It's affecting your job, the same kind of processes. I work with individuals who are super consumed with their body image, and therefore, and I say that, they say they're super consumed with their body image, and therefore they focus on working out to an extreme. And those are usually indications of underlying issues that you have to work on, not just the amount of that they're exercising, but what are the underlying issues that are leading to that.
Yeah, any of these addictions, I think we would say that there may well be an underlying piece that is potentially driving that.
Yeah, there always are.
And wouldn't you safely say that it's also perhaps a bit of anxiety that's driving that? An anxiety to either be in control, an anxiety to somehow have a boundary with someone, or not feeling as though you have your own ability to set boundaries with people.
Yeah, anxiety is a big motivator for all substance and behavioral addictions, big time.
Okay. You were talking a moment ago about couples that you'll work with, and this particular question ties into that. If a couple makes it through recovery, what results do you see that can offer us some understanding that it's worth it? So that it's worth going through that, because you even indicated that
there's a lot of divorces
sometimes divorces happen because everything bubbles up. I think you were saying, and now it's out in it's overt when it was covert before it was hidden. So this particular question, if a couple makes it through, what results do you see that can offer some understanding that it's worth it? So Hope, what have you seen?
Well, one of them is that the person with the addictive background, the compulsive use, has to be in ongoing care. And so if they stay in that care, then you can have dramatic changes in the marriage and then the family. I do work with individuals where they'll get to a point and then they'll end up like they have separated and then they've come back together and use occurs again. You better have really clear boundaries. If that use occurs again and you've decided that, if drinking happens, you can't live in the home, then you got to hold to that. The one of the important pieces is with couples, recovery takes a while. Early recovery is the first 1 to 3 years. So a lot of what I help the spouse with is if you're going to stick it out, this is going to be a process. But you have to, in the midst of it, hold to your boundaries really clearly. If you do this with sexual addiction, if you do this with drug and alcohol, then these are the consequences and you hold to them. And so then they, in their early recovery, when they have to hold to those consequences really firmly, they get through that point. The big piece is the spouse also has to be in their own support. That's huge. I don't like the terms co-addict or codependent. I think they're very shaming. However, that doesn't mean that that individual doesn't also need to get support with all of the things that they've been going through and the ways that they might actually be setting up situations that cause problems for the addict. If they're either letting them get away with things or not holding to boundaries and things like that. So in the process of recovery, it's important that both are getting help in whatever that looks like. And then they have to, one of the biggest things is often you have a period of, it happens pretty early on, of grieving, where you have to be able to say, we've lost these 10 years of our marriage, of our relationship. And so there may have to be a time of grieving that. And often what I'll do with couples is take them through a grieving process and then even through a ritual of having some kind of memorial of now that we're in a new place, okay, now your recovery is good, I've gotten the help that I need, and we've grieved the years that we've lost. Now we have to create often a ritual to say goodbye to that, and then new rituals. And often when you're working with families, you've got to establish new rituals that aren't around the addiction like they used to be. And so that's a process that is beautiful to watch, actually, when I get to help couples and families to that point.
This is like you're almost building a brand new relationship, even though both of you...
lots of new things.
Lots of new things, because of the rituals. Rituals are life expectations. So we expect this is going to happen, we see it happen, and we do like routine as humans. So there's a tendency for the spouse to actually perpetuate the negative rituals by virtue of trying to support the mate, is what I thought was...
Well, and one of the things in that is that, I'm trying to start a whole new thing, and I'm in good recovery, and the spouse is trying to be supportive. But the reality is the pain comes back in the middle of recovery. The spouse that's been the user of whatever they've been using, one of the biggest pieces I work with them with is that when your spouse gets triggered and all the pain that happened during those years comes up, how do you respond to that? Because often what happens is, but I haven't used in 3 years.
Right.
But I haven't. And there's, you know, and so one of the biggest pieces that I work with couples on an ongoing basis is how to respond when your spouse gets triggered and all their pain comes back about what happened during those years of use. How to respond with humility and saying, oh, so when I was gone for longer than I said I would be, or when you saw me pick up my phone, or when you saw this bill that didn't know what it was connected to, you got flooded with all of those feelings that you had in the midst of use and so on. And you validate, that totally makes sense that would happen for you because I did some awful things. And that's even now, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years later, it's coming up for you. And I'm so sorry that the choices that I made, are affecting you even today. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. That's a hugely humble response.
Yes.
Hugely supportive of the pain that this family member has gone through. And this can be children. This can be the wife or the husband. So that's in the process of recovery for couples and for families. I work a lot with how to deal with triggers and how to deal with when the pain comes up, the trauma of what happened comes up again.
Let's model that, can we? Let's model that. You're the addict.
Yeah.
I'm the spouse.
Okay.
We're just modeling this, okay?
Okay.
And then, so all of a sudden it comes up, we're at our child's graduation from high school.
Right.
And I'm watching little Cindy. I'm going to make up a name, Cindy. And when I watched her walk down and she almost tripped, and then I saw her get really anxious, it just reminds me of when you were drinking. I just hated it. We've worked through this, but I hate it that I have to see our own daughter suffering at her own graduation that should have been spectacular, and I could see the pain in her face, and it really comes from you.
So when she had all that happen at the graduation, it brought up all the pain of, I wasn't there. So she's having all of these issues.
Yeah, and I was helpless.
And she wouldn't, and I wasn't there to help you.
You were
or
nowhere to
support
be
you,
found.
And I was nowhere to be found. And so right when that happened, when we're sitting there at the graduation, all that came to you, that feeling of anger
helpless.
with me, and you felt helpless again.
Yes, again and again.
And I put you there over and over and over again because of the stuff I got involved in. I put you there over and over again. And even though things have been going well, here it all came up right in that moment. Yeah. I'm so sorry that all that stuff came up right in that moment. And it makes sense that it would, because it's very similar to all the times that I wasn't there for. Yeah,
that's our daughter.
And how many times I wasn't there for her or for you.
Yeah.
And so it came up then. It makes sense that it would. I'm so sorry that there, right in the middle of that, it came up. And I'm really glad you're telling me. I'm really glad.
We've worked on this.
I know we have.
Paid a lot of money to our therapist, way too much.
That doesn't mean the pain doesn't come back up. And I want you to tell me when that happens.
Yeah, actually, our therapist told us to be overt with our emotion, and I'm not trying to hide that.
I'm so sorry that moment right there should have been great, and all of it comes up, and the things I did.
Yeah, it ruined it for me. It ruined it for me.
I'm so sorry. And I want you to tell me when those moments happen. I really do.
Okay.
I really do.
Yeah. Well, to thank our therapist, we were able to do this because I've got my feelings out.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a lot better anyway.
So when I'm working with the spouse that's been the user or the family member that's been the user, it takes a lot to help them get to that point, because the reality is they're feeling attacked.
Yes.
They're feeling like, oh my gosh, you'll never forgive me. You're holding, when am I ever going to be? I sat with a couple actually doing a session in Singapore, and he hadn't been doing the sexually addictive stuff for a very long time. And she brought up the night before they got with me, it was just a consultation, and the night before they got with me, she brings it up and he says, are you ever going to get over this? I'm sitting there with them, and I said, and I didn't know this had happened. And I said, one of the things that commonly happens is when the spouse brings up their pain and the trauma they went through, the person that used will say, "Are you ever going to get over this?" And he was like, he looked at me and he goes, "I said it last night." I'm like, "Oh, well, why would I know that?" Because I sit with couple after couple after couple where this is what happens. I'm describing this perfect scenario, and I tell spouses, this is the perfect scenario. Good luck. I hope you get there. The reality is it takes quite a lot for this person to then also realize that maybe the way they're saying it had a bit of an attack to it, maybe, right? And so when I'm working with the couple, I'm also working with the spouse on how to say it in a way that doesn't have the attack attached, which is super hard when you're triggered. So.
Yeah, and it's part of the empathy that you want to build into a couple.
Yeah,
where when you realized that I've been too harsh, I was way too harsh there. Yet I was authentic with I'm making this up, of course. I've seen it too many times.
Being real.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right, exactly.
Which is really important.
Yes. So if you'll notice toward the end, in a way, you continue to offer empathy until I could de-escalate.
Right. Yes.
And you were self-regulating until then I brought in, the idea of the therapist, and we pay too much for that therapist. But yet we were able to come to about the same level. So it's being able to sit in that. That's a very...
Sitting in people's pain is a huge part of empathy, is the ability, and that's really hard for the user.
Yes.
To sit in it and go, especially because a lot of times the user doesn't even remember. If it was a substance, it was a drug or alcohol, they often don't even know that they did those things. And so you actually have to help the user sit in their spouses, in their family members, in their child's pain. And that's hard. It's actually one of the biggest pieces in most research that makes the difference in recovery is the ability to have remorse and to be, I did that to you.
Yes, because also the fact that typically the user or the addiction itself causes the person to become very compulsive. And the compulsivity actually wipes out or severs or decreases the ability to have empathy for self. Not even to mention
both
self
directions.
or the empathy for the other.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why when I work with couples, I have to always make sure I'm working on empathy for both the husband and the wife, or the mother and the child, whoever, both people that are sitting, because honestly, it was hard the whole process is hard for everybody involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's very helpful. Now, if we were to end that that scenario, what might happen as you really showed empathy for my pain because I had to live with it and had no choice in it, and it actually changed the way I behave towards Cindy. This is a make-believe person, but Cindy here. That situation. Now I'm beginning to actually find myself again. Because I now have a voice. And I have a voice in this relationship. I have a voice toward the daughter. And I'm becoming more human. And at that point, if we're able to stay present during that scenario, that exchange, which is hard, it's very difficult, is at that point, I would have more self-empathy. Therefore, I could extend it to you. If that makes sense.
Yeah, empathy is a big piece.
Big piece of this. This ties into someone who actually is talking about having self-empathy, this next question. And that is, the person is asking the question, and moving forward with a new relationship, I know I won't forget what happened in my past relationship. But I know I cannot ever handle my new partner being involved in any form of addiction, pornography. I'm not sure what to do to relate clearly to my new partner that it is a deal breaker in partnership for me. It sounds like there's several questions in this. One is the excruciating fear here that the person could have a new partner who is involved in pornography and wanting to set boundary with this person, it sounds like, and how to express that, how to relay it clearly.
Right. Yeah. So this definitely comes into my office because when use, say in this case sexual addiction and pornography, has occurred in past relationships, and then people start over with or end up in new relationships, the fears of that happening again can be huge. And often what will happen is they do end up with somebody who does have that background. That's actually pretty common.
Okay, now why is that? Help us with that. And that is, I know that to be
There's
true.
so many different thoughts behind why that's common. Because I'll get somebody, this is the third spouse I've had, and all of them have been addicts. The reality is there can be things within the individual for why they're drawn to certain folks. But usually when I'm dealing with a couple, they did have previous relationships with people that had some kind of addictive use, especially with sexuality, especially with men. The percentage of men who use sexual things like pornography in an addictive fashion or are involved in pornography is, upper 90s in percent, including in the religious community. So the likelihood that the individual that you're with doesn't have that background or would never struggle with that background that's challenging. However, one of the biggest things that actually helps spouses to not end up using in different ways is, again, to sit in how incredibly traumatic that's been for that individual. To sit in the depth of betrayal that behavior causes.
Yes.
And so, of course, you can never be sure that this person you're going to be with is never going to do these things.
Right.
But one of the biggest things that helps is that ability to go, if I engage in these kinds of behaviors, this is like an affair.
Yes.
And this would feel, and so I want to make sure that my partner understands this is the depth to which this would be devastating. So if this is a challenge for you, I need you to let me know, because I really couldn't go through that.
Could not go through it, yes.
And it's not about you're never, it's not about if you're expecting a male that's never dealt with that. It's very rare. But the reality is being able to say, I need you to commit to that this isn't something you're going to engage in. And if it's ever a pull, that you can come and talk to me. But again, a lot of it is expressing the depth of the pain and the betrayal.
Yeah.
That's actually true when I'm working with couples in the midst of it and they've decided to stay together, is really helping someone understand the pain of that betrayal.
Yes, therapist I know on this issue of pornography, that I know I've worked with both men and women who have pornography issues or addiction. I have never heard a woman but say this, and that is when I've discovered my husband or my boyfriend is into pornography, the depth of betrayal when you were talking about that, and it always ends up very clearly articulated as it's as if he is having an affair. And as we know, Jesus talked about how deplorable an affair is in a marriage, how it can sever, certainly. And I know I'm speaking something that most of us have heard, but that is a devastating piece. So being right up front in a relationship, particularly in the case here of this person, and we're not suggesting the person who wrote this, that you're predisposed to find someone or to be attracted to someone who necessarily...
Why do I keep...
Yes, it's not unusual in a number of reasons. Another reason is when we look at what seems normal, it's sort of like in domestic violence. It's very common, unfortunately, and I know this is part of your training as well, Dr. Konzen, that if someone grew up in a violent home, it's very, unfortunately, natural to be attracted to violence. It sounds counterintuitive. The reason that is the case is because you actually have neurological structures that form your reactivity and your reaction, to the behavior that is over the charts. It's out of bounds. It's catastrophic. That actually you tend to lean into that and almost seek that out. It's kind of a strange phenomena when we think about it. but there's a tendency for that to happen. I never forget the woman in the hospital where I worked, a psych hospital, and was employed there, and we were doing work, and we had a family day. It was a Thursday family day, and we had everyone from the hospital that wanted to come in and observe. We had about 25 people there, and then it was families came in who were working with the addicts. And then we stopped, and I and another therapist, we said, anyone that's in the fishbowl here have anything to say? And this one woman, she raised her hand, and she was an inmate. And she said, oh, wow, I just had an aha moment. I realized what I just saw you two therapists working with those two people in the center here, that it caused me to realize that I could fall madly in love with the most alcoholic, abusive man in this hospital, and he would become my sixth husband. She realized that she had a propensity to continue this cycle that she was so unfairly harmed early on in her life. Yeah. So it's a very devastating piece that this can be when you think about that we might lean into something rather than being able to recognize it. So how would a person, say in this particular question, how would a person recognize if, say, this person is finding a person attractive and not aware that they are involved in pornography or not? What would be indicators? What would be a way that this person could discern this?
Well, one of the big pieces is, does this person you're attracted to, are they in good, when it comes to the Bible and Jesus,
Yes.
Are they in good discipling relationships? Do they have other people involved in their lives that they're open with? I'm like, boy, pay attention to that one. Pay attention to that one. Is this somebody that allows other people into their life to help them with their life? Yeah, I would look for that.
Yeah. And probably also ask them what is their daily relationship with the Lord, and do they include the Lord in meetings and times that you're together with them? Yes. So in this situation, I know that there's another question that I have as our time is winding down here, and it takes us back a bit to what you were first talking about. It's related to the three you had talked about. If I can go back to this real quickly, the three types of addictive legal: nicotine, caffeine, and alcohol, which you were referring to. This person said, I know that since coffee is a legal drug, it's easy to make a habit to drink it. Yeah. And then how do you know when it's an addiction? We talked about this a bit. How do you know when it's an addiction? And of course, no one out here drinks coffee, so we're not speaking, So, okay, someone has their coffee cup right here. They're holding them up and showing us their coffee here. Okay, is it best to replace it with another habit? We've heard people that substitute it, like run instead of drink your coffee or something, jog, or limit the amount. So, is it best to replace it with another habit or to limit the amount? How does coffee affect depression and anxiety in a person? That's a second question, kind of a secondary question.
So what's new to the DSM as well in this last couple of years is caffeine withdrawal. Now you can actually get a diagnosis for caffeine withdrawal. Yep. The reality is most of the general public goes, oh, heck yeah, I know what that is. That's when you go, when you can't have your coffee.
So you start thinking about coffee.
Right.
You get jittery. And
you get jittery. Literally your body goes through withdrawal. When people talk about the headaches, caffeine does have an effect on the nervous system. Most people use it for a variety of reasons. And yet caffeine itself, they'll use it to help with stress, but then caffeine itself can actually bump up stress. So honestly, my first thought is go read it out of the DSM. It'll tell you exactly when it's a problem because it actually lays out. So you can actually search it on the internet. What is the DSM diagnosis for caffeine withdrawal? And then you can read it and go, is that me? Oh, shoot. It is. So then yes, caffeine is incredibly addictive. Well, nicotine is incredibly addictive. And so those two can often go back and forth. Of course, the health consequences for nicotine are much, much more serious than caffeine. However, often what people do when they want to get off caffeine is they want to figure out other coping styles. What are some other ways that I can cope with what I've used caffeine to do for me? What are some other ways that I can, adjust my lifestyle so that I'm still getting what I need that I was using caffeine to give me?
And that's back to the question you discern between dependence and addiction. So maybe this question was asking more, am I dependent upon this, or am I addicted to it?
Yeah, there's no question about the physical dependence. That's why the body shakes.
Right.
So there's no question about the physical.
Yes.
And so that really bothers people. Like, I don't want to be physically addicted to a substance, including caffeine. Can you lower it? Yeah, you can. Well, that's actually the whole idea of, with alcohol, it's what you call harm reduction. Can you get to the point where, the whole idea of either you don't drink ever again or you lower the amount? This is where the difference is going to be with substances. Alcohol, for many people who have an addictive background, if they even have one drink, they're caught.
Yes.
Caffeine doesn't have quite that level of impact. However, if it gets to the point where it's, you're feeling like you can't function in your day without it, then that might be an indicator. So,
Okay. So specifically, let's specifically for coffee itself. What would be some coping mechanisms?
Can you cut down?
Can you?
What are some coping mechanisms? Well, honestly, most people use caffeine to give them energy. And so what people will do is they'll go, I'm going to do energy drinks from now on. Usually, honestly, most people who switch out change their diet. So it's usually a nutrition issue. And it's usually a movement issue. Again, this comes back down to exercise, doing yoga, doing, some kind of movement and getting energy from those kinds of things. And then it's also dealing with sleep patterns. Making sure that you're getting decent sleep. So figuring other ways to actually gain energy other than just drinking. It might be your 6 Diet Pepsis you drink a day, and it might not be coffee. Whatever your caffeine substance is, learning to find other ways to actually... That's actually why people end up using meth and cocaine.
Yes.
Because they can get a lot done when they do meth. They can get a lot done.
Yeah.
And it's the same, it is a very similar thing to why I take an energy drink or why I take cups of coffee, because I get more done when I'm got this substance. They're stimulants. So
talk to us for just a moment with your background understanding the idea of movement, because you've mentioned it several times, and I've seen that when I work with a biologist, the medical doctor, making sure that the person can do more movement. Talk to us a bit what exercise, this may be an area that you readily talk with your clients about. Talk to us what happens biologically when we're able to exercise. We know about endorphins. We know about the sense that we're...
Well, it comes into the dopamine reward system, actually. It ups your level of dopamine when you move. And so I tell people, number one, don't do like monster steps. Do baby steps. Start something simple. Walk. I've got somebody right now that is dealing with an addiction in my office, and that's where we started, was just start walking. Keep it doable. Don't jump and go, I'm going to go work out, 5 days a week. Yeah, good luck with that. Start with something doable, baby steps in that direction. But also make sure it's enjoyable. So this is actually, there's a book called Health at Any Size. So I use it a lot with eating issues. And I love how the author of that book talks about enjoyable movement. It's really important. Don't just choose any movement, choose enjoyable movement. So make sure you're enjoying what you choose to do. Yeah.
So as we wind down, addictions actually shut us down, so we move less. We actually have less self-efficacy.
They can. Some addictions can actually make you move more.
Well, excuse me.
Depends on which one you pick.
That's right. We just talked about that. Yeah, that it might give you more energy, seemingly for a period of time, and then there could be a crash that follows that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've just about run out of time this evening, and I want to thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation and dialogue. We've actually been able to get through the questions that were brought forth, and would you join me in thanking Dr. Jennifer Conson for her contributions this evening. I so appreciate, you may not know this about Dr. Conson, but for 20 years, if I'm correct on this, 20 years, she and her husband Tim, just as laypersons, gave to their community, and you were seriously involved in helping disciple people. And this is where you see this, the Bible concepts and understanding just kind of ooze out of you in the sense of it's so rich and free that you share this. So that piece, Jennifer is very, very practical in her abilities. One of the reasons why I bring therapists to my therapist is that it's a way that others who may not have a therapist, this would be a great way to see a spectacular therapist like Dr. Jennifer Conson. So I want to thank you for being here this evening. So appreciate that. And as we think about the next presentation that will be on Tuesday, March 1, I want to invite you back to taking control of your anxiety. We're building some on what we did here this evening, and we will have Dr. David Levy back with us. He was here a couple months ago, and he is returning. The last time he was here, he got so enthused about what took place. He was saying, when can we do this next? And I said, well, in about a month or two here, if that would be okay. And so he's coming back. That is our neurosurgeon, Dr. David Levy, who is able to help us with prayer and biblical concepts. So it is taking control of your anxiety. That is Tuesday, March 1 at 6:45 here in the auditorium. So thank you so much for coming this evening and being a part of this, your questions, your responses here. I'd like, if we could, to close with a word of prayer and want to thank those who were listening by live stream and those who will be listening to this at a later date. So let's have a word of prayer, shall we? Heavenly Father, we're thankful for who you are and whose we are because of how you reached out to us. Healthy people reach out to others and seek for their spiritual development. And thank you, Father, that you're the one who first reached out to us, and we're so thankful for that. And we bless you this evening. Thank you for Dr. Conson. Bless her and her work, her ministry, helping hundreds and hundreds of people, even internationally. And so bless her and her family. And we ask that you'd bless those who have been able to listen in, participate, or even listen later to this at a later date. So we thank you for that. Most importantly, we thank you for your presence into each of our lives that makes all the difference. That's why we hold these sessions, because we believe that all healing comes from the heart of God. And so we thank you for how you've brought healing this evening. Even as we have spoken, you have worked through this. You're with us, and you'll go with us as we leave here this evening. We give you praise this night, thanking you for who you are and whose we are because of Jesus Christ. And in his precious name we pray, and I pray, amen. Well, God bless you. Thank you again for coming this evening.